as I get settled up here, you may want to take your Bibles to the Old Testament, to the book of Ecclesiastes. It's not necessarily what we're going to study, but we're going to spend some time there today. I don't know whether you remember last week, we started what I said would be several weeks on this idea of to live as Christ, which will primarily be a study through portions of Philippians, but not entirely this morning. Not entirely anyway. Last week we looked at, basically Paul's situation. What inspired this book of Philippians? I hope you remember that. Paul was in prison in Rome. He had virtually been abandoned by everyone, he said himself, in Timothy. The Philippians had sent both some money and some help to him there. They had taken up an offering, brought it to him, and intended to leave one of their church members there to sort of act as his helper. Being he was alone, and then Epaphroditus became sick and had to go home. So Paul wrote this letter, Philippians, to accompany him. And you remember that sort of the main point I made last week was how Philippians was such a joyful letter. How Paul, everything he talked about in that letter was seemed positive and just encouraging and wonderful. He had so much praise for the Philippians and so much advice. Even his own circumstances he spoke of as if they were wonderful. And the question was, how do you get that way? That's Bible stuff, right? That's the kind of stuff we hear about from pulpits and we read in books that's what our lives should look like, not how we should feel similarly. But how do we get that way? And I said the short answer is through total commitment. Through total commitment. And so as we go through Philippians, passages of it at least, portions of it over the next few weeks, that's going to be the overwhelming theme, is what do we see in there that Paul did, what did he say of himself, how he got to that place. And that road is in there. It is absolutely in Philippians. But it starts with the idea of, as we'll see mostly next week, not entirely, but mostly next week. It starts with the idea that you're going to have to determine that Christ is the purpose of your life. He alone is the purpose of your life. And that's what we will begin to look at today. Christ has to be my purpose. Christ has to be my purpose. Okay? And so let's start there. Let's start with that idea. Have you ever heard of what's called existential questions? We all ask them whether you realize you do or not. Existential questions. Existential questions are things like, what's the purpose of my life? Why do I exist? Those are existential questions. And that kind of question, it has been wrestled with by every person ever born for the entirety of human history, right? Poets, philosophers, artists, musicians, preachers, scientists, farmers, me and you, we all want to answer these questions. We want to answer these questions. Why am I here? Why was I born? What happens next? And there's really only one question. These sort of just frame one question. And that question is, what's the purpose of my life? What's the purpose of my existence? And as a result, this idea, what is my purpose, has been written about and sung about and debated and discussed and preached and taught ad nauseum throughout human history. And rightly so. It is one of the most fundamental questions that a person can ask. The reason we even ask this question is because that's sort of baked into each one of us. We were created for a purpose and with a purpose and by purpose. And because of that, it's natural that we would ask what that is. I think probably one of the saddest things, if you will, that was lost in the garden, among other things, is our sense of purpose. And one of the things that we do, whether you realize this is what you're wanting or not, is if you can answer this question, what is my purpose, you can frame the rest of your life around it. It gives you a direction. It gives you an idea of where you want to head, what you want to be, how you want to get there. And so this idea of purpose, it really just permeates everything that we are. The answer to that question will set the course for your life. Now, short-sighted people ask this question for what are essentially sort of simple, self-centered reasons. They think, well, if I could find my life's purpose, throw myself into that, I would finally be happy. And that's not entirely wrong to assume that purpose will lead to happiness. True purpose will. But it's where they look for purpose that's the problem. You see, for some, the answer to that question, what's my purpose, lies in things like power, money, honor, being important, influence over others, recognition. Sometimes it goes as far as fame. For others, they want to indulge themselves, travel and experience food and drinks, maybe rare, expensive things. Still others look for purpose in things like creativity and self-expression. We craft, we hobby, we paint, we write, we play guitars. We do all of these things because we want to express ourselves, sort of find our purpose. I think the saddest kind of place that people look are in what are inherently good things. Work, career, family, right? Church, religion, good deeds. People look for their purpose in these things. And here's the thing. Really none of that stuff I listed is wrong in and of itself, right? It's just what it is. But when you mistake any of that stuff for purpose, the end result is going to be emptiness and disillusionment. Absolutely, hands down. And that brings us to a guy by the name of Solomon, who wrote a book by the name of Ecclesiastes. Let's talk about Solomon for just a minute, if I can get this to cooperate. King Solomon was the dude who literally had it all. Literally had it all. I'll tell you about that in a moment as we go. It may surprise you to learn, or maybe it won't, that this was the experience, this search for purpose. This was the experience of one of the most important and influential men in the entire Bible. Early in Solomon's reign, Solomon was a guy, here's how I would classify him to you. I wouldn't call him a hero of the faith. I might call him a cautionary tale about faith, right? More than anything. Early in Solomon's life, in his reign as king, he was David's son and the last king of unified Israel. Early in Solomon's life, you talk about a man of faith. He went to God shortly after he became king, and he begged God to help him. And he said, I only want one thing from you. You're a great God, and you've put this great people together, and I can't do this. I'm not big enough for this job. And if you don't help me, I've got to have help. And I'm asking you to give me wisdom. 1 Kings chapter 3. Of all the things that Solomon could have asked God for, he said, all I want from you is wisdom. I need help to do what you've got me doing. And here's what God did in response. You can find this in 1 Kings chapter 3. We're not going to turn there. I'll just share it with you. In response to that prayer, God said this, Behold, I have done according to your word. See, I have given you a wise and understanding heart, so that there has not been anyone like you before you, nor shall any like you arise after you. Also, I have given you what you have not asked for, riches and honor, so that there shall not be anyone like you among the kings all the days of your life. God was so pleased with Solomon's request early on. He could have, as king of Israel, he could have had anything he wanted. He could have asked for nearly anything he wanted. But instead he went to God in complete dependence on God. And he said, all I want from you is help. I just want wisdom to know how to do this, how to live my life and lead these people you've given me. And the Bible says that God was so pleased with Solomon's attitude and his request, he said, you know what? Not only will I do that, I'll give you wisdom. I will make you the wisest man who's ever lived and the wisest man who will ever live. Even after you, no one will ever be as wise as I'm going to make you. And he said, and besides that, because that's what you asked for, I'm also going to give you literally everything else on earth. Riches and power and glory and honor. You're going to have it. You are literally going to have it all. And Solomon absolutely had it all. Solomon was the only man probably who ever had it all. In his time, he was the richest, most powerful man alive. Literally. He was universally regarded as one of the most intelligent and talented men who have ever existed. His reign was characterized by peace, prosperity. Most famously, he constructed the temple in Jerusalem. His partial, now this is interesting, and I'll just share it with you. In 1 Kings chapter 10 and 2 Chronicles chapter 9, the Bible sort of gives a partial list of what Solomon had. His worldly possessions, literally. It wasn't an exhaustive list, it was just an example. Right? Let me show you what I mean when I said Solomon had it all. His income was 25 tons of gold per year. That's what he made. Okay? As of the gold price this morning, that means Solomon's annual salary was $4,100,000,000 per year. Per year. He had a massive ivory throne, the scripture says, that was overlaid with gold. 300 shields in his house, gold drinking vessels, the temple that he built, and his own palace, which was nothing like anyone had ever seen. It included a storeroom, which was so big that they named it the Forest of Lebanon, because they said that if you went into it and saw it, the amount of cedar timbers that was in it just to hold up the roof looked like you were walking in the woods. He had a fleet of ships which every 3 years brought back gold, silver, ivory, wild animals, apes, and peacocks from all over the world to him just to have. 1,400 chariots, 12,000 horses. I can't keep up with a dog. I don't know how he managed to do all that. And to make things worse for the rest of us, not only was he rich and powerful, but he was also considered very good looking. Even Jesus said in Matthew chapter 6 that Solomon was arrayed gloriously in his physical appearance and the way he dressed. He was a talented writer. He wrote 3,000 proverbs. He was a musician. He wrote over 1,000 songs. He even handmade the musical instruments used in the temple. This dude had it all. He had it all. And what did he do with everything he had? He made the mistake of thinking that all that was his purpose. And all of that stuff became his reason for living. And we see that in Ecclesiastes chapter 1. Open to Ecclesiastes chapter 1. We're going to read quite a few verses here. Part of chapter 1 and a few out of chapter 2. Not to study necessarily. I just want to show you where his head is, right? Where Solomon's heart is. The man who literally had it all made the mistake of thinking that that was his purpose. And that's where it all went wrong. Look in chapter 1, beginning in verse 16. Now, these are Solomon's own words. He wrote this about himself. Chapter 1 and verse 16. We'll keep right on reading down through chapter 2 some. He says, I communed with my heart, saying, look, I have attained greatness and gained more wisdom than all who were before me in Jerusalem. My heart has understood great wisdom and knowledge, and I set my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. I perceive this as grasping for the wind, for in much wisdom is much grief, and he who increases in knowledge increases sorrow. So Solomon said, one of the things I decided to do since I was so smart is just pursue wisdom. I was going to know it all. And that's what I set my heart to do. In chapter 2, he said, and then I said in my heart, come now, I'll test you with pleasure. Enjoy every pleasure. But surely this was also vanity. I said of laughter, madness, and of mirth, what does it accomplish? I searched in my heart how to gratify my flesh with wine, while guiding my heart with wisdom, how to lay hold on folly till I might see that what was good for the sons of men to do under heaven all the days of their lives. Verse 4, I made my works great. I built myself houses and planted myself vineyards. I made myself gardens and orchards. I planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. I made myself water pools from which to water the growing trees of the grove. I acquired male and female servants. I had servants born in my house. I had greater possessions of herds and flocks than all who were in Jerusalem before me. I also gathered for myself silver and gold and special treasures from kings of the provinces. I acquired male and female singers, the delights of the sons of men, musical instruments of all kinds. I became great and excelled more than all who were before me in Jerusalem, and also my wisdom remained with me. Verse 10 is where we'll finish up. What a great summation. Whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I did not withhold my heart from any pleasure. For my heart rejoiced in all my labor, etc., etc., and my reward was from all my labor. So you see what's happened here? The guy who had it all went from being the wisest man alive to living a life as if all that he had was his purpose for living. This guy did it. He answered the existential question for himself. He set his heart and his mind and his hands to accomplish, to build, to gather, to collect. This guy decided, you know what I'm going to give my life to? Everything I ever wanted. I'm going to devote my life to having everything I can imagine. And he did it. He got it. And I want you to look how he ended up. He says in chapter 2 and verse 17, I hated my life. He says in chapter 2, verse 18, I hated my work. This book, Ecclesiastes, actually starts with his sort of summary of all this. Vanity of vanities, chapter 1 and verse 2. All is vanities. Chapter 1 and verse 14. Everything is vanity and grasping for the wind. How can the wisest man who ever lived, arguably the richest, most powerful man who ever lived, who was also good-looking, talented, smart, be this miserable? Because he made the mistake of thinking that purpose could be found in anything except Christ. Anything except Christ. He says in Ecclesiastes chapter 1 that everything is vanity. By the way, he repeats that several times throughout this book. I would love you to read Ecclesiastes this week, just as you're sitting around on the porch reading. It's only 12 chapters. You can knock it out in a few minutes. One of the things that he repeats throughout this whole book is everything is vanity. That was his conclusion after a lifetime of searching. And listen, here's the thing. If anybody was going to ever figure out the meaning of life, this is the guy that was going to do it because he could. He don't have the limitations you and I have. Right? I can't just put myself into anything I can imagine wholeheartedly and pursue it till I'm sick of it. I have to go to work tomorrow. So if anybody was going to figure out the meaning of life, this is the guy that was going to do it. And you know what he discovered? That it's all just useless. It's just useless. that term that he uses repeatedly, vanity of vanities, is interesting. You'll see him say that many times in this book. It is the strongest Hebrew superlative you can use. It's like when we say Jesus is King of Kings. What do we mean by that? It's the greatest king, right? What Solomon says is this kind of pursuit is vanity of vanities. It's worse than useless. That word vanity means a breath or a vapor. What Solomon means when he says this kind of pursuit is vanity of vanities you could paraphrase it this way. Solomon is saying, my life was spent in a completely empty pursuit. And no matter what I chased and what I caught, it was temporary and unsatisfactory. And that's how I figured out it's all just so useless. Vanity of vanities. Finally, after a lifelong pursuit, the last words of this book in chapter 12, we find right here. Solomon sums up what he figured out. In fact, he says in verse 13, let's hear the conclusion of this whole matter. Let's hear the conclusion of this whole matter. Fear God. Keep His commandments. This is man's all. There you have it. From the mouth of the one who had it all. From the mouth of the one who gave his life to figure out the purpose of life. Here's how he concludes his search. Fear God. Because this is everything for a man. Keep His commandments. This is everything for a man. Now, with all that in mind, I want you to leave there and go back to Philippians chapter 1. I want to show you something real quick as we close, actually. We're about done here. With all that about Solomon in mind, I want you to just flip back to Philippians chapter 1 for just a second. Because by contrast, I want to once again show you Paul. Solomon, the richest, most powerful, wisest man alive, the man who had it all, says, I hate my life. I hate my work. Everything I've done is a waste of my time. By contrast, Paul is sitting alone in jail in Rome. Remember? He is awaiting probable execution, abandoned by everyone he had depended on, and those who came to help him, he had to send away. He's alone in a place that is not his home. He's facing death with no reason to believe that his circumstances were going to change, and all he can talk about is joy. For 4 chapters, Solomon and Paul, 2 men with 2 very different lives who come to 2 very different conclusions. What's the difference? Paul understood something from the beginning that it took Solomon a lifetime of wasted years to figure out. There is one answer, only one right answer, one to the existential question. You know what it is? It's Jesus Christ. It's Jesus Christ. Christ must be, if you're going to find meaningful purpose in your life, it's going to have to be found in Christ. And look, I love you, and I'm telling you right now, you look anywhere you want as long as you want. You run as fast and hard after your goals and your dreams and all of these, and there may not be anything wrong with those things. But if your purpose is not Christ, you're wasting your time. And you will never be fulfilled. and you will never be happy, and you'll always be chasing the next thing. And Solomon, if he were here today, would tell you, stop it. I've already done this. And I've done it better than you, further than you, faster than you, and I can tell you right now where it's going to get you. I hate my life. Because the only true purpose is Christ. Remember a few minutes ago when we were looking at what is an existential question, I didn't delve into it, I just mentioned it. We ask this question for a reason. You know, dogs don't ask this question, and cats and horses, right? They don't ever stop to think, what is the purpose of my life? What is, next for me? Right? We're the only thing on earth capable of doing that. The reason is because God's built that into us. I mentioned that a moment ago. And that constant need that we have, and we all have it, that constant need that we all have to find something to grab onto and to give our lives to, that is there by design. It's there by design. Except what's supposed to happen is that searching is supposed to lead us to the person of Christ. But when we let it lead us all over the place and all these other things that were on the board listed, all this security and family and money and job right and all these things, when we let that sort of need for purpose lead us to those things, you end up where Solomon ended up. You let that need lead you to Jesus and you end up where Paul ended up. Look at some of the stuff Paul said. I made this at the last minute this morning because I loved the contrast. When I started digging through Solomon's words and digging through Paul's words and laid them out side by side like this, it just absolutely blew me away. Solomon with all that he said, I hate my life. Solomon with all that he had. Paul with everything he was experiencing, he said, I've learned in whatsoever state I am to be content. Solomon had everything and couldn't be happy. Paul had nothing and he said, I have everything. What? Let me show you the difference and then we're done for the day. Okay? Let me show you the difference and we're done for the day. Philippians chapter 1. Verse 21. Here's the difference between Solomon and Paul. And here's the difference very likely between me and you and Paul. It's right here. Paul understood life's purpose. And if you're doing anything but this, that's why you're miserable. And it's universally true. It's not you. It's me too. It's all of us. If it's anything but that, that's what's wrong. That's the difference between everybody and Paul. For me, to live is Christ. And when you get hold of that and you begin to do it, you'll see what Paul is talking about and what I'm talking about and what the Bible's talking about. Next week, Lord's will, here's what we're going to do. Enough setup. We're going to dig into this statement. What does it even mean when he says that? To live as Christ. Okay, I get it. I get what you're telling me. This is where I got to be. This is where my head and my heart have to go. But I don't get that. What does that mean? Lord's will, next week, this is where we'll go. We're going to dig into what Paul means when he says to live as Christ. Christ is our purpose. Let's have a word of prayer.